So this is our panel where you get to ask all of the questions maybe that weren't asked. You get to find out what we like to do in our free time. No, really, please, you're going to have some really smart people up here. So welcome to the stage, Chief Architect Alan Kent, Gordon Knoppe, Elena Leonova. Who else is coming up?
I don't know.
Anton Krill. Yep, you're up here. I'm going to go ahead and grab you.
Vitaly up the back.
And Vitaly. Goratun. Go ahead and clap.
Yeah.
The question was how to convince your customers to migrate from Magento 1 to Magento 2. So what will be the selling points? We actually saw that when we were doing merchant beta, and even right now when we have deals on Magento 2. So a lot of people interested in Magento 2 specifically, even if they on Magento 1, because of performance, scalability, also because of roadmap of the new functionality, especially if they have plans to grow, and stay with Magento for a longer period of time, and especially if they going to, if roadmap of the things that we are trying to do is aligned to the with the strategic goals that you have. And in terms of migration, it's again we know that, for example, every migration from Magento 1, from one version of Magento 1 to another version of Magento 1, costs some pretty decent amount of money. So with Magento 2, all of those migrations is supposed to be easier and cheaper for merchants. So it actually saves money for the merchant. So it's one of the main selling points that we have at the moment. So basically performance scalability, easier migration and cheaper migration, and also new features that we plan to add to Magento 2.
One thing I'd probably add just to that one, there was a weekend hackathon, which also involved a Dockathon over the weekend, and one of the contributions is somebody went to a lot of effort of creating a table comparing different versions and functionality of the different versions. So that just became available. Is Tanner up the back there? That's been pulled request, has it? And
So Tana, would you stand up again just for a moment? So one of the driving forces, by the way, behind the documentation effort and behind the Dockathon that happened here, Tana Berry, I would love to give her a round of applause for her Herculean effort. Because if you've been around Magento since the early days of Magento 1, you know the documentation story.
Yeah.
Next question? Okay, yeah, so we've got one mic, so I'm going to run around.
I believe we actually missed one second part of that question. Okay, we will answer that later.
So I haven't been sitting here for all of the sessions all day, so maybe this has been answered. But you've talked a lot about how you're improving, well, in the past, improving the number of SKUs that can be handled, the number of promotion rules that can be handled. It seems like there's been improvement there. One of the struggles we've had is with the number of customers, or registered customers on the site. We have 20,000 plus customers registered on the site, and sometimes that becomes an issue. Has there been any focus on improving that aspect of the site, or of Magento?
Ben, don't go away. Can you give more information where exactly you had the problems with it?
Well, especially in the admin area, it's difficult to,
Okay.
just
Okay,
filter, for example.
Yeah, so I assume that the widget grid was the bottleneck in this case. And yes, in Magento 2, we have another new implementation of widget grids and forms based on UI components architecture. We use front-end rendering. And we fixed that issue that we used to load all IDs to browser. So if you have millions customers, then sometimes browser may crash. So we fixed it. That was just a kind of bug, an issue, and we changed the approach, how we submit the mass actions in the grid, so we don't have that issue. Okay.
And sorry, I can add to that. I think performance was part of the acceptance criteria. There was sort of the code that we write has to be able to perform certain operations against a fairly large data set, given a certain hardware profile. So that was literally part of acceptance criteria.
Hi,
Hi, I do dev for what I consider to be a fairly customized Magento site, and I'm just wondering if anybody has any sort of timeline on what it might take to bring forward completely custom modules, also third-party modules, custom theme, all that. And I just don't know if it's going to be a few weeks or if I'm planning on a 6-month project or what to look for.
Yeah. Well, I'd say again, it varies on the size of your code base, of course. But I think we would be looking at something like breaking down your extensions when we talk about that list, really identifying the exact work you need to do, and then putting a timeline in. So I would say from our merchant beta experience, right, these were simpler to medium projects level of efforts, and the program was on the order of a couple of months, right? So we have a lot of use cases of relatively simple implementations and rollouts and successful rollouts, but it always will depend on the amount of custom code you've got.
And I can add that whatever amount of time it will take you to upgrade your very first project, you should also add the benefit that the second one will be easier, right? So you have to do that first time, and it will be really maybe tough and challenged, but still you invest in future.
So
I just want to thank you all. You all do great work, and it's really a privilege to have our store with Magento, and I applaud you guys. One question I did have is on when we do the migration, did you run into any issues with DB size? Were there certain DBs that were too large that you need to break down, or?
No. I think I would say first the caveat would be I mentioned a cleanup routine, right? So we did have on our ECG side several full analysis of databases, and cleanup is important, right? So this sample database I'm thinking of took something from 40 gigabytes down to 5 gigabytes, right? There's a lot potentially that can be cleaned up. You don't need to migrate your indexes, these types of things, right? So once you've reduced it, in that case, we saw a migration in the order of just under a couple of hours in the worst case on that big database, right? So it's a question of flow. It's a question of testing it and understanding how long it'll take. But no, there was a bug that was fixed because of a large database, but it's been fixed. So no, it shouldn't be an issue for you.
Just wanted to add to that like while we were here, so there was a separate session where our merchant beta clients were sharing their experience, and there was one project that you can easily see right now on Twitter, where they migrated pretty big like database, and it was like using our data migration tool, which also can be extended to cover all of your customizations, extensions that you have, and you can migrate all of them using data migration tool, and which is good. So no issues so far. Everybody is like more than happy with that.
Okay, I have one question which might be a bit different. When you built Magento 2, where did you look for inspiration? Did you look at some special competitors or special frameworks? And also now, as soon as you release one version, it's already time to start looking for next version. So where are you looking now for inspiration to the next generation of e-commerce?
So I can answer that, like the first part of it, and I will leave like somebody from architects to take the technical inspiration, like where they get technical inspirations for Magento 2. So obviously for Magento 2 in general, pretty much the same as for Magento 1. So we look for what our customers want. And actually Imagine is one of their sources where we get like these ideas, what our customers want to, like we usually ask our merchants that come to the conference, what are they specifically looking for, like what kind of features they want. And internally we do a lot of like researches, we get an NPS score, we look at some of their like modern trends and something that people would want to start using. So we actually try to be as innovative as we can. And that's pretty much it. Like we are not inventing, like we are not sitting in house like in the closed office and just thinking about features. We actually listen to our customers and just prioritize roadmap based on that. And for the technical part, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, so from technical, obviously we were looking at, since Magento 2 is mainly platform. So one of the main differences of Magento 2 from Magento 1 is platform or framework. We're obviously looking on different frameworks, web and web applications. Most of them were not from PHP. We were looking at Java applications and Python. Obviously, also looked at Zen and Symfony, but they more copy from those languages. Yeah, and now where we are looking, again, we are looking at different other applications, different web frameworks, and some books, and many ideas come from community. Now that community gets the taste of application and of our framework, they feel they get this feeling of working with Magento 2, and they do proposals in that direction. So for framework level improvements and for business logic improvements, especially we are currently having public discussions of a couple of proposals on multi-node inventory, for example, how URL rewrites should work. So that's where we get ideas from.
Yeah, we also look at trends in the marketplace, new technology. We have conversations between product and architecture on, hey, this is a neat new thing coming up. How does this apply to the problem set that we hear from our community and merchants to grow forward? And that helps us really figure out how do we lead, how do we get in front of some of these trends that we see coming down the pike.
And actually, I can add to that as well. It's a big family story, but one of the things that I see as kind of the person sitting at the cusp of the organization and the community is just how often, and some of you may have heard me say this before, just how often when somebody tweets something or talks about something, sometimes I will find out about that from like the product management chat or the engineering chat. So this is literally the people who are helping to make decisions about the product and the people who are actually implementing things in the product are truly paying attention to what people are saying, from the community, as well as reaching out, I think to just broader surveys, industry news, and things like that. So you do have a voice. It's why it's very important to speak up. Please never ever feel frightened to speak up. And of course, you can email pretty much any one of us or ping us on Twitter or whatever. If you have even the craziest idea, sometimes that makes the biggest difference. It helps us prioritize what we're working on. Next question.
In years past, one of the features that has been talked a lot about being a bigger part of the Magento roadmap has been reporting and business analytics tools. And I'm wondering if there were any improvements in that in Magento 2. The reports in Magento 1 are very one-size-fits-all. They aren't great, in my opinion. And I don't know that that's necessarily a criticism as much as it is just it's very difficult to write reports sight unseen, for what a merchant really needs in the end. But I'm wondering if there's been any improvement in that, make it more flexible and easy to write customized reports for merchants, or to add things like sell-through reports or other things that a lot of merchants commonly use.
So the answer to that question is that we do have that in the roadmap. However, it's not implemented yet. And actually, right now, we actively talking to different merchants and partners and different people across community to see what specifically different people across reporting and business analytics want to have, because you can see reporting and business analytics from different perspectives. So it is in the roadmap, and we actually would like to talk to you to see what specifically you would like to have. But as I said, it's not implemented yet. It will be coming later.
I have a question about this multi-master database support of M2. Is this something out of the box, or do we need some configuration? And how does migration tool handle this data splitting? Can it handle it?
I'll take the migration tool first. So the splitting of the databases is something that happens later. If you think of your entire schema, you can then move these particular tables to a different database. So in a migration tool sense, it's only going to be considering the entire database before you need to divide it. So it would be more like a copy operation to move those off before you begin and before you start taking traffic. You would split those 3 databases.
And what was the first part of the question?
So to enable this multi-master database support, what do I have to do? I mean, is there any configuration or it's just out of the box?
No, it's not out of the box. There is command, console command you should run to split the databases. And I'm not sure if it will write the configuration, but you will have to write different configurations for different databases. You will have to configure resources, but I'm not sure if the tool will do that for you. Probably not, but it's just a couple of lines of configuration for databases. And the actual migration of tables is done by the tool.
Yeah, so actually, like real specific details. So if you want to do it from the get-go, you can run the tool that'll pre-split the database. You just point to the databases, you're good to go. If you have existing data, you'd run the tool to kind of set up the system, and then there's a series of SQL commands to break the foreign keys in your unified database so you can copy the data over into the separate databases. And the reason why we do that is because there's some instances, if you've got extensions that have customized, you could have an issue when you're trying to break those foreign keys. Internally, we've talked about, as an improvement to the database splitting, to roll that up in a more automated way, but we haven't gotten to that yet, so we felt it was safer to say, you've got a big database, you know it well, you know your customizations, so when you do the breaking of the foreign keys. I think we have that. I'm looking at Tana. I don't know if we've got that on the DevDocs site. I know ECG has that information, I think, floating around. We've got it on some internal wiki pages. If that's something you're doing, feel free to ping one of us, and we'll get it to you, or at least get it on DevDocs.
Oh boy, Alistair.
It's honestly not a hard question. You mentioned regarding the marketplace that you'll be accepting encrypted code. Not that that's necessarily an issue, but you also mentioned you'll be reviewing the unencrypted code. Will the encrypted version be validated, that it still matches what's been reviewed, and what will be the process of ensuring that?
I can have a go at that one, and it may not be a perfect answer, but what we're going to be doing to start with is basically a trust relationship. We're going to ask the extension developers to provide both. Frequently, they don't encrypt the whole module, they frequently encrypt sort of a subset of it. We're going to, I'm pretty sure and if any of the marketplaces, if I get this wrong, they might jump up and throttle me afterwards, but I think we put a badge or something or other on it to indicate that this includes encrypted code. At the moment, we don't provide a standardized encryption technique. They encrypt it, they provide all that technology, so we can't do the encryption for them. One of the interesting ideas, and it's just an idea at this stage, is should we standardize the encryption technique? Because then we actually do the encryption for them. The negative of that I'm sort of slightly queasy about is we're not actually trying to encourage everybody to encrypt it, and if we provide it as a service, will it actually encourage everybody well, just click that button, and it makes it much harder for solution partners who need to actually support it and harder for customers. So it's a little bit, we're still thinking that one through, and feedback welcome on that one.
And you may already have heard some of this, but in the larger discussion, I mean, I know personally I'm opposed to obfuscated code because it's worthless to obfuscate code. There are some difficulties right now. I think IonCube, I don't know that IonCube has a module for PHP 7, which is one of the ways, one of the popular ways. I don't think they do. So, and of course we have to have the badging because you have to know that you're getting this and that's part of, that's part of the deal of what you're getting. But overall, so the whole idea about one of the things that we're hoping for with Marketplace, one of the things that we're really working towards with Marketplace is that we have solved a lot of the reasons why people encrypted their code, right? We expect, if we've done this right, most merchants will be getting code from this very trusted store of this very trusted store of extensions. And we have skin in the game because we have this rev share split. We want that quality to be exceedingly high. we want to make sure that there's no plagiarism involved, and there were some discussions about that earlier. So we expect that folks that maybe have previously encrypted codes, had encrypted their code, will feel less of a need to do so in the future. That's one of the driving sort of principles, I think, behind the new version of Marketplace. And I would also say we have already taken a very strong stance against even past incidents of plagiarism, and we have absolutely blacklisted some of the notorious offenders, and they're done. They don't get to come back. They're done forever. Goodbye. And if someone submitted an extension to us with some encryption, we had that trust relationship, that circle of trust. Guess what? If they submit something that's encrypted that doesn't match what we reviewed, I would put my hand up and say, bye-bye forever. That's just, we all have to operate on a lot of trust in this community, and if you violate that, I'm sorry, you're out.
On the same subject, you said, okay, there's going to be a verification process for extensions.
Yeah.
And you're going to promote some extensions because of reasons, but if the community says that one extension is crappy, are you going to take it out?
So there is a community advisory board that's also a part of the marketplace approach. So it's not only us doing these reviews. I actually don't know the exact details, but there is a community. We're getting a number of people from the community to help us do some of that verification.
I just want to give one input for the encryption PHP call. Encryption PHP call. I think Facebook follow the Microsoft .NET protocol. They kind of compile PHP into a middle machine code something. Then we don't need to buy some kind of third-party encryption thing. If we can use the Facebook PHP. Yeah.
Sure. I think Ben probably said it better in a way that we're actually trying to make it not necessary, because it makes life harder for solution partners. So we'd rather make it not necessary than come up with a good solution for it.
Yeah, even some of the good stewards, or I'd say the good actors who have the bigger extensions, folks like Unergy, who's actually here at the conference. You have very large extensions that are very pricey, but when you get that code, there's actually only a small subset of very key sort of class definitions that have been encrypted. And those are great because that actually still allows you to get into a lot of the code and extend it. I know, from a developer experience in an open source world, it's less than ideal. I understand why people have had to do it in the past, but we're really, really trying to fix it from the business side of things. And I think, actually, from what I've seen so far in Marketplace, I think we've got it right. Next question.
As an enterprise user, and I'm sure all the other enterprise folks here will agree, if I approach my executive team and say, we need to migrate to Magento 2 for all these great reasons, they would be properly motivated to prioritize that migration. If I could say, if we were an M2 site, we would get a X discount on our next year's licensing fee. Are there such incentives available?
Yeah, wrong panel. This is a technical panel. So.
Well, and there are people here with whom you can have that discussion. We definitely are not among that group, but it's an interesting idea.
I have a question regarding the user guide document, because that one for the Magento 1 been a great help for us in training the customer on how to use the site, how to use out-of-the-box functionality, and it's not available for Magento 2. So what is
user guide?
Yeah.
So there is a user guide for Magento 2 Enterprise Edition and Community Edition, and it's available on the DevDoc site. Link is not here, but you can find it very easily even if you go to magento.com and documentation.
Okay.
There is also, it depends what you use, but you can find it in Merchant Portal if you're enterprise user, or just on magento.com, as I said. And also, in addition to user guide, we also have training for merchants, so that you can understand how to use the system better. And I believe there was even a session today. But there is a training that you can take to understand all of those new functionalities that we have in Magento 2, like how to use that.
Thank you.
Ben just mentioned that Ion Cube Loader wasn't for PHP 5.6, 7. So we use that with RapidFlow, Unity RapidFlow, because the native importer is so slow, and we import product data nightly. I'm wondering if Magento 2 has improved the native data import-export tools.
Yes, we definitely improved the import-export, and it was one of the things, so we actually like to tell the story, because we previously asked during all of our events that we do, there was a buy a feature game where everybody was allowed to participate and choose which feature you would like us to improve. And import-export, it was exactly that feature that we initially didn't plan to improve immediately, but based on the feedback that we got through all of the events, it was added to our backlog. So import-export already improved. It's 4 times faster than it was with Magento 1. Just try it. If, for some reason you still want to have some additional improvements, let us know. But it is better. It's way better than it was with Magento 1.
And I'd say in the merchant beta, when I was mentioning those new features that might exist in M2, that you could remove a third-party extension, not to name names, but that one or others that are similar like that were commonly replaced with core.
Yes, sometime earlier you mentioned you would add API annotations for publicly available and mostly never changing with BC breaking stuff. But if you're adding BC breaking in anywhere, is it visible for us as developers somehow? So do you stick to semantic versioning or something like that?
Yes, we do. We stick to semantic versioning at API code. For code marked as at API annotation, and we also publish the list of modified classes in our DevDocs website for current version of Magento 2. So we have a list of classes modified since 2.0 already. So you can go there and see what's modified, or you can just do a diff. But we have it with a description of what specifically changed in that class.
And I'll plug Alan's blog. He's got a great description of how the versioning is being done for semantic versioning.
I realize most of the discussion here at Magento 16 is going to be around Magento 2. But for those clients who want to stay on Magento 1 for a while, you guys mentioned there's going to be 3 years of support for Magento 1. Will there be any more point releases, or will it just be bug fix releases? Will we be stuck on 1.14 and 1.9 for forever?
Yeah, so for Magento 1, as I said earlier, and as we announced publicly, is that we plan to support Magento 1 for another 3 years from Magento 2 launch, which happened on November 2015, so it means by November 2018, we plan to support it. And by supporting, we will provide functional and security releases. We do not plan to add new functionality to Magento 1. All of those new improvements and new functionality will go to Magento 2. But from another perspective, you have a plenty amount of extensions available on the market. Most of solution partners have something for Magento 1. So you have plenty of options if you would like to stay on Magento 1 for those 3 years period, and then decide when you would like to migrate to Magento 2. But if you're interested in Magento 2, there is also migration tools, all of these projects around migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2. So you have options. You can choose, in this case, what you like better.
Hi. We have clients that are both on Enterprise Edition and Community Edition, and I've found, especially with Magento 1, that as soon as I start working on a client that has an Enterprise Edition, the documentation gets very, very sparse because there is very little external community documentation. Is that going to be addressed at all in Magento 2? I've had times where I've spent 4 hours digging through source code for a 10-minute fix because it was Enterprise and not Community. Is there going to be a little more support for documentation for Enterprise in M2?
By documentation, you mean merchant-facing documentation or technical documentation for Enterprise? Technical. It's actually a great question to ask. I'm just thinking how to better answer that. So we open merchant-facing documentation publicly for everybody who use, actually openly to community. So now you can see user guide, and actually you can see a lot of documentation about Enterprise Edition on our DevDoc sites. But there is a ton that wants to say something to add to my words. So.
Great question. Thank you for asking that, because we actually struggled with how to handle EE versus CE documentation. So what we have is the same documentation code base for developer-facing documentation, at least. It's absolutely the same. And if it is an EE-only feature, we have a little tag by it that says EE-only. So right now, it's absolutely together and transparent.
So to expand on that one, there is a lot more documentation in Magento 2 on the technical side than Magento 1. But if I was a realist, there's a much larger community around CE than there is around EE. So there would just be more people talking about CE than EE. So if you go off to Stack Exchange or Google, or, those sorts of places, I think it is going to be a reality. I'd love it to be more EE, but we can't make the community, it's the size of the community that will drive it. It's just reality.
Which is a perfect segue into, as one of those interesting folk who have to deal with both, it would be really great, actually, if in all of your spare time, if you can, actually, if you go and you find documentation lacking for an EE feature, absolutely. I mean, it's all the more important for us to have people submitting documentation. Just because, as Alan said, there are fewer and fewer of folks working with EE to do that. Great question.
Or even just submit gaps. So even if you don't have a code fix, even if you just tell us there's a gap here, it just helps us still.
Okay, I'd like to ask about the security regarding Magento 2. So with Magento 1, we had a couple of security breaches. And I'd like to ask if Magento, for example, decided to work with one of the web application firewall solutions so that it will supply the rules, basically, that prevent the usage of those breaches. Because the time to create a rule for web application firewall, once the breach is found, it's really quick comparing to preparing a proper fix and so on.
Do you want to talk to that one? I'll take it otherwise. Okay, so one thing that's happened in that particular area, he wasn't able to make it this conference, but I've now, so I'm an architect. I'm actually don't have any engineers talking to me, reporting up to me. So I've now got one, and he is an information security expert. He's got like 15 years background, he's been at Microsoft, he's been at HP. He's got a fantastic background, and so we've now got him on board. When we're a part of eBay, we're able to use the eBay resources a lot more. Now that we were a separate company, we're sort of building up these new resources ourselves. And boy, has he hit the road running. So there's a whole lot of aspects that I think you're going to see a lot more work in the future around that sort of area. In general, I'd say web application firewalls, they're great for doing quick patches until you actually get the security fix out, and they're very useful for that. But if we don't know what the security thing is to fix is, it does make it a little bit interesting, because can we prepare the fix in advance of knowing what the bug is? No. So it is an interesting idea of whether we should have a recommended firewall. There's a lot going on. We are actually doing some evaluation of different firewalls at the moment. Whether we're going to be able to get down and say, this is exact one. Well, so there's some offerings, for example, by CDN providers. Fastly are doing some work, CloudFront have done some work, Amazon are doing work. And so often it depends on which hardware you're deployed on and which services you're using as to which ones are going to be easy to integrate into your solution. So I don't know if there's going to be one firewall to rule them all. Because I think unless we get every single person on the one piece of equipment and nobody else is using anything else, I don't know if it'll ever be that easy, to be completely honest. But it's an interesting idea, and if anybody's got better ideas or better feedback, I'd love to get them, but that's my reading of the market at the moment.
And just to translate from Australian, HP is Australian for HP. I have to pick on one of the most amazing people I know in this community. Of course, Alan Kent, who has takes so much time at the top level and works all the way down through and putting great information out there on his blog. It's really worth checking out. We are at the end of time for our session. There are multiple shenanigans, I think, this evening, receptions this evening. So please make sure that you spend time not just networking with us, network with each other. And we want to thank you very, very much. I want to give a big round of applause, please, to our very smart panel.